Emmy Award-winning anchor on PBS, host of the Lessons in Leadership podcast, and the author of the book, Lessons in Leadership, Steve Adubato. Steve, it is great to have you on the radio. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be with you as always, Frank. And last Tuesday, historic, fascinating, shocking, and it's reverberating all across New Jersey and the nation. And you're right, across the world.
So,
big stuff.
Steve, you are the go-to guy when it comes to political analysis, but especially New Jersey political analysis. But the problem with you that I have, and I've known you for 17, 18 years, and I've considered you a friend in all that time, at least 3/4 of that time anyway, is, the problem that I have with you is that everybody knows what a skilled election analyst you are. So you get called by a lot of shows. I heard you on with my brother, Joe Piscopo. You were on with Dominic Carter the other day. You've probably been on 5 or 6 other shows that haven't even been invented yet. But for our show, Steve.
Hold on. Whoa. Wait. Hold on. Before we go any further, I was texting you at, I don't know what time it was in the morning on Wednesday after,
That's true. No, and I appreciate that. And I
said the first show, the most important show was Frank's show. I said you should have called. You should have texted me at 3 in the morning.
It's
and we would have done it live.
It's true. Now, but here's the thing.
This is true.
Now, here's the thing, Steve. That is true. But that means for our show, when we have you on, you really have to bring your A game, and you can't give the standard analysis that you give on all these other shows. We need really unique Adubato-isms for the next 15 minutes or so. Okay.
Hold on 1 second. I got to go throw away my talking points, Frank.
There you go. That's what I want to hear. All right. Now, the big news out of New Jersey seems to be that Steve Sweeney has lost. He has not yet conceded the election, but the number of ballots that he's behind, it doesn't appear that he can catch up to his Republican challenger, Edward Durr. It was reported initially that Edward Durr only spent about $153. Looks like that's not entirely true. Looks like it was $153 in the primary and then a few thousand in the general. But still, in terms of funding, he was significantly outmatched by Steve Sweeney. But not only did Sweeney lose, but so did his Assembly running mates. Why did Sweeney lose? Was it just a Republican wave, or was there more to it than that?
In that district in southern New Jersey, right, Governor Murphy ran so poorly in that legislative district, and he ran poorly in a whole range of congressional districts that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a couple minutes, that Democrats currently hold and are clearly now in trouble. And so Sweeney got swept away. Listen, last time Sweeney ran, he spent millions and millions of dollars in a very competitive race and won. And for Durr to win this race, it's not about Durr at all. No disrespect, a commercial truck driver, very supportive of Donald Trump. None of that had anything to do with this. It was when people are voting, most folks go down the line, and the line they went on in that southern New Jersey district started with Republican Jack Ciattarelli running for governor, and Sweeney didn't have enough juice to have people move off that line, frankly, and find him, and he lost by a tight margin.
So we've always heard stories about high-profile politicians. Maybe they're members of Congress. Maybe they're, Joe Crowley in New York is an example. Maybe they're speakers of the House. Tom Foley is an example, former speaker, that lose in their districts in spite of having a statewide or even a national profile because they don't take care of their district. They forget about doing the work that you need to do in terms of constituent services. It doesn't sound like that was the case with Sweeney. It sounds like his opponent was just a beneficiary of Ciattarelli's coattails.
I believe that, Frank, but I got to tell you how weird this is. If Murphy had won, comfortably, and Sweeney wins the Senate race and he's the Senate president again, he's been Senate president for a dozen years. He's the odds-on favorite to be the Democratic nominee for governor 4 years from now.
Sure.
Now he's out of the state legislature in January, loses his Senate seat. So I don't believe it's a question of staying closer to home. Sweeney's one of those hard-working, more conservative, independent, moderate Democrats, if you will. The irony is much of Murphy's problem in New Jersey, even though he did win by 50, 60,000 votes, is that he was perceived in suburban districts, more swing districts, as way too progressive, way too far to the left. And Steve Sweeney is the opposite of that. He is the quintessential Reagan Democrat, if there's such a thing. And that's the irony of him losing this race in a district that Murphy got crushed in.
It's funny. I did see on Twitter on election night and the day after a lot of progressives celebrating the end of Steve Sweeney's career.
Him.
Absolutely.
They don't like Sweeney.
So
he's not. That's what's so weird about this race. Go ahead. I'm sorry, buddy.
No. Well, I want to pick your brain on a few different things, but now that the Republicans have picked up seats in the New Jersey Senate and the New Jersey Assembly, what does that mean for Phil Murphy's second-term agenda? Is it going to be tougher for him to push through a progressive agenda, or because the Democrats still have a majority in both houses, will he still be able to get his agenda through just as easily?
You know, Frank, this is what's so interesting about labels, right? There are Democrats, and then there are other kinds of Democrats. And what I mean by that, and by the way, same thing is true of Republicans. You look at my friend.
Right. Peter King is certainly not Marjorie Taylor Greene,
And Chris Christie is not Donald Trump.
Right,
and they're trying to say that publicly right now. Trump says what he says, and Christie's saying we got to look ahead, not look behind. I get all that. But in the Democratic Party, it is so crazy that there are certain far left Democrats, and Murphy is definitely on that side of the aisle. And then there are more conservative or more independent Democrats, and they're not part of the same party, Frank. They're really not. They don't have the same ideology on a range of issues. There are people like I'm interviewing Senator Paul Sarlo, who is from Bergen County, suburban district. Murphy did not do well there. But I would say this, he's a Democrat. I'm interviewing him in a couple of days. He's the head of the Senate Finance Committee. He's going to have more tough questions for Murphy about, quote, what things cost than they ever have before. Murphy has gotten a lot of things that he has wanted, and I happen to believe philosophically in what Murphy wants. But remember this quote, Frank. If taxes are your issue, New Jersey's probably not your state. Who said that?
Well,
Phil
Governor
Murphy.
Right.
How do we know that? Because Ciattarelli, the Republican, was so smart to run that ad again and again.
Well,
you can't say that in a state like New Jersey, and he's going to be pressed on the price tag of things and the taxing implications of those policies in a way that has never happened before in a second term.
Well, it is interesting that I thought that was uncharacteristically candid for a politician to say that comment, but it was very, very shrewd politically for Ciattarelli and his team to hammer that home in with voters up and down the state. So now that you mentioned Paul Sarlo, he was one of the people that they were talking about as maybe being a successor to Sweeney as the Senate president. Have the Democrats settled on who Sweeney's successor as Senate president will be? Do we know who that is?
Well, I'll tell you what. They met a couple of days after the election. When I say they, the leadership in the legislature, the county chair, like all inside baseball stuff. And Murphy was apparently there too, Governor Murphy. They apparently, even though in New Jersey things could change by tomorrow morning, Frank, they apparently have agreed on a guy by the name of Senator Nick Scutari. Scutari is the chair of the State Senate Judiciary Committee. He has been the leading legislator sponsoring the legalization of marijuana for a decade now, and it's going to be happening in New Jersey. It's Nick Scutari, I believe, will be the president of the Senate when the Senate and the legislature convene or reconvene in January. That's what's about to happen.
Well, it's very interesting. I did wonder, once Sweeney's defeat was likely, why nobody mentioned former Senate President Dick Cody as a potential successor. Why is Cody seemingly so unpopular among some of his Senate colleagues?
Now you're really getting inside. But I don't think that Cody, who was the former governor who replaced, at the time, you remember, disgraced
McGreevey.
Governor McGreevey, who's done a lot of good things since, but at the time he did what he did and handled things the way he did and stepped down, and Cody took over. I think there's a strong sense that, and I don't like saying this because it could happen to any one of us, and later on in our careers, I believe there are a lot of people in the Senate who believe, quote, his time has passed. Mm-hmm. And that happens in politics. It happens in the media. It happens and definitely in sports that it's not his time.
Absolutely.
And Scutari is a younger guy. And frankly, he was the consensus candidate from Union County. And plus, in all candor, to get really inside, Cody does not have the support of the Essex Democratic
I see.
party. And now, again, your audience is like, what is that about talking about? Again, when you come from Essex County, you grew up with this stuff. It's in your blood.
And people have been saying that about you for years, is that your time has passed, that you're a little past your prime. So we understand that. Said from a place of love.
Well, just because you're a young guy, you're an up and coming, you got the radio show, you got everything going on, right? And you got to hit me because I'm on the back nine right now.
Well, we're going to discuss golf in just a minute. But give me your take before we run out of time discussing golf. Tell me what you think this portends for the 2022 elections. The conventional wisdom is the Republicans are very well positioned at this point for maybe a takeover of the House, maybe a takeover of both houses, maybe even flipping some state legislatures around the country. What's your take on where we are headed into a year from now at this point?
So just look at this. I mean, unless my math is wrong, Frank, and you know this stuff better than most, if the Democrats lose 5 House seats next year, just 5, if the Republicans flip them, right? That means the Republicans take control of the House. 3, possibly even 4, but I would say 3 seats in New Jersey in the lower house are currently held by Democrats, all of whom are vulnerable to lose this race next year. Why do I say that? Because Murphy lost in those districts, because the Republicans smell blood, because they're going to be spending money putting up strong candidates, and those Democratic members of Congress are moving as fast to the middle as they can, Frank. One of them is Josh Gottheimer, a Congress member up in Bergen County. Put it this way, he was one of the the Democrats in the House that got this deal brokered on infrastructure. More and more of those Democrats are going to run away from Ocasio-Cortez and that wing of the party and say, no, we're middle of the road. Everyone says New Jersey is a blue state. It is a blue-collar state. It is a suburban state, and that's where those districts are.
So you think not only can the Republicans potentially win the House, but the path to winning the House may ride straight through New Jersey?
New Jersey.
Wow.
Listen, if you win 3 – if the Republicans flip 3 of 13 congressional districts, right, 3 that are held by Democrats, they only need 2 more in the rest of the country. There's the math, Frank.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if that's the case. Now, let's talk about the implications for the Democratic agenda and the both locally and nationally and the remaining Democrats who are still in office. Does this provide a cold shower to the Democrats not to move too far in a left-wing or woke direction, discontinue taking Abraham Lincoln's name off schools? That was the example James Carville used the other day. Or because the Democratic caucuses, both in Congress and on the state legislative level, might be a bit smaller, do the progressives within those caucuses have a larger voice, and will that voice be amplified? Which way do you see the Democratic Party going as a result of this election?
Right to the middle. I'm telling you, Frank, like I said, there are Democrats and there are Democrats. And listen, I have great respect for the Bernie Sanders of the world and the progressive, liberal, some say socialist wing of the party. I don't love using that term because I know it's seen as a really negative thing, even though we have social welfare programs, if you will. But I got to tell you something. The fact that Bernie Sanders came in for Phil Murphy at the last minute, that was the guy he brought in. That's not the direction the Democrats are going in. They're going hard to the middle. And I don't think that the progressives understand that the way they stood in the way on the infrastructure bill, and I was talking about Ocasio-Cortez, who voted against it on matters having to do with climate change. I believe in the need for climate change. I believe we got to do the right things. But I'm telling you, when you the Abraham Lincoln stuff, the woke stuff, they are so far out there. It's not, quote, my father, God rest his soul, that wasn't the kind of Democrat he was. That's not the kind of Democrat a lot of Democrats are in New Jersey and across the nation. I believe the progressive wing of the party is going to have to ask themselves, do they want to stand on principle as they see it and not get anything done, or are they going to collaborate with more moderate Democrats to actually coalesce? And by the way, P.S., I know you didn't ask me, but the Republicans have some issues too.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I'm going to ask you about
is it going to be the party of Trump, Or is it going to be a party of Republicans that want to, as Chris Christie said, look forward? Donald Trump is huge. He's the 800-pound gorilla in this. He earned that in the Republican Party as being the powerful player he is. But I got to tell you something. You saw what Glenn Youngkin did. Yeah, okay, Mr. President, we appreciate it. But he stiff-armed them, Frank. He did. And Ciattarelli didn't want him here either. But you can't criticize. You cannot criticize him. And the Republicans are going to have to thread that needle very cautiously.
We saw yesterday in Pennsylvania, Congressman Connor Lamb, who's a moderate Democrat running for U.S. Senate, go out of his way to tweet that he's a normal Democrat. That was his quote. And then another swing district Democrat, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, she used the word normal after her party lost the governor's race in Virginia. Are we going to see more congressional Democrats, Senate Democrats running next year, labeling themselves as normal Democrats as opposed to squad wing or progressive level Democrats? And is that a strategy that you think can be effective with voters in swing states like Pennsylvania, Virginia, and the like?
Well, again, it depends upon the candidates, their likability. Jack Ciattarelli was likable. Youngkin was likable, if you will. What I mean by that is personable. They look good on camera. They seem like decent people you'd want to hang out with. I got to tell you something. It's not only the Democrats, Frank, that are going to call themselves. I don't think they're going to use the term normal because as someone who thinks about branding a lot, normal is not. What is the other one? Abnormal.
Right.
I think they're going to say moderate, right? But I'm going to say this. You've got a member of Congress, Congresswoman Malliotakis. Help me on this, Frank.
Absolutely. That's my Congresswoman.
Now, right, but I know. She's now considered the enemy by a lot of Republicans because she, quote, voted for Biden. She voted for what was right for her district. And when we get Democrats and Republicans so crazy, Frank, that we demonize people for doing what's right for the district because they collaborated with Democrats to get it done, or Republicans, or Democrats collaborated with Republicans, that's horrific. That's terrible. That's not good for our nation.
I completely agree with you, and I've been talking about this for 3 days, and I've gotten a lot of conservative listeners angry with me because I think,
so what, Frank?
I think Nicole's vote is not only the right one based on the merits, because I sit in the parking lot that is the Staten Island Expressway on a regular basis, and I don't really have a big desire to pay higher Metro card fees or a congestion pricing fee, and I don't know how any New York congressperson, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, votes no on a package that gives $100 billion in funding to New York for transportation infrastructure. I just don't understand it. But it's not just Malliotakis that's been in the crosshairs on this. You have Andrew Garbarino in Long Island, Jeff Van Drew in New Jersey, Chris Smith in New Jersey, and I point out to people in our area, look at all the fact that 6 of the 13 Republicans that voted for this are from New York and New Jersey as a pretty good indication that this is not a bad bill for New York and New Jersey. Is it a perfect bill? No, but I'm yet to see a perfect bill come out of Congress.
Frank, there's no such thing as a perfect piece of legislation. That's ridiculous. The reality is this. When people vote in the interest of the people of their district, they are doing their job. Listen, when Chris Christie years ago, I'm always amazed at this. Hurricane Sandy hits, right? New Jersey, New York were destroyed, right? Everybody remembers it. Obama is the president at the time. Christie goes and kisses his butt, plays the game, shakes his hand. I don't even know if they hugged. It doesn't really matter. And he's getting criticized for engaging the president when the state needed federal help to do all kinds of things. And Christie then has his cell phone number to call, Mr. President, could you break through this or that and whatever federal agency. Would Republicans have wanted him to stiff arm, as I said again about Trump before, the president? Because what? On principle? And then people suffer unnecessarily? You and other people who depend upon transportation are suffering every day. And so the Republicans would have you and everyone else suffer in this region for what? To make Biden look bad? It's not a good enough reason. It's a ridiculous reason. It's not government. It's not the way government's supposed to work.
We're talking with Emmy Award-winning PBS anchor Steve Adubato, also the author of the book Lessons in Leadership, also does just about everything you can do in media, columnist, podcaster, you name it. Steve, just going back to New Jersey for a second, you alluded to the fact that Steve Sweeney would probably have been the front runner to be governor in 4 years had he won re-election. Now that Sweeney's not going to be in the Senate anymore, who is the front runner for the Democratic nomination for governor 4 years from now when Murphy is term limited?
See, you know how crazy this is. Like I sit there and I go, okay, Sweeney would be a good candidate. I think he'd be the front runner. And I realize how ridiculous it is. Now think about this. Sweeney was that guy 4 years ago, 5 years ago at the time, because it was a year before the last gubernatorial election. Out of the blue comes a guy from Goldman Sachs. I think I've heard this before, a.k.a. John Corzine. Mm-hmm. A guy who says, you know what? I'm going to spend tens of millions of my own dollars, and I'm going to support the Democratic county chairs and the different organizations around the state. And I'm basically going to clear out the field. And so my point is, I don't know who that rich guy or rich woman is. So it's so absurd to think about legislators, members of Congress. They're a really solid member. There's Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill, happens to be my congresswoman, right? She's terrific, a moderate Democrat. She served in the military. She's terrific. She's smart. Who knows if somebody says, I'm going to spend $30 million of my own money, then all of a sudden they get the nomination because they buy it out. That's what's been going on in New Jersey for too long. And so that's why it's so hard to predict these things.
Well, it's certainly going to be
interesting. Which is a shame, by the way.
Yeah. No. So you're not going to give me a name. You're not going to let me pin you down to a name.
Nah.
All right.
Nah,
fine.
They're too many. It's too soon. And by the way, how this plays out with Murphy and how other Democrats deal with him is going to go a long way, Frank, in answering the question you just asked.
All right. No doubt in your mind that Jack Ciattarelli's the Republican frontrunner in 4 years, though.
Put it this way. Jack Ciattarelli is the head of the Republican Party. He got not only a ton of Republican votes, he got a lot of independent votes, and he got some Democratic votes. And the only way to know that is in districts where Democrats have won. Put it this way. Biden wins the state by 16 percentage points over Trump, and Ciattarelli loses by 2, meaning Democrats had to vote for him. He is a very popular person, ran in a great campaign. I don't agree with him on every issue. I challenged him in my interviews with him, but he's always respectful, courteous, as I said, likable. He is going to be, whether he's not the chair of the Republican Party, doesn't need to be.
But he's the de facto leader.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he is. And if he wanted to run for governor, listen, if he wanted to run for new U.S. Senate, who knows when that race is up. I think he wants to be a chief executive, and I think he'd be a solid candidate. But remember, 1.1 million Democrats, right? More Democrats than Republicans. That's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, that's how badly the Democrats ran this time, that it was this close. Over 1 million more Democrats than Republicans. That's crazy.
Now, you mentioned Chris Christie and the differences between he and Donald Trump, both substantively and style-wise. Both of them have gone out of their way to draw out those differences this week. Tell me what you think we're going to see for the future of the Christie-Trump relationship. It's looking very likely that Trump will run for president again in 2024. Almost every opinion poll shows that he'll have a lock on the nomination. Is Christie somebody that would actually try to wrest that Republican nomination from him in spite of how daunting it may look?
Couple things. First of all, no one has a lock on anything. That includes Donald Trump. There are more lock. I mean, we're sports guys, right? I'm a Yankee fan. They're a lock in the Eastern. Yeah, everyone's a lock, right? And then all kinds of things happen that nobody anticipates. Andrew Cuomo, right? During the height of the pandemic.
Yeah. The question was, is he going to be president or vice president? That was the question a year and a half ago.
Right. That's my point. That's my point about how ridiculous this is, to prognosticate, which is what I'm doing right now. Here we go. I think Chris Christie, having known him for 15-plus years, respect him, like him, have disagreed with him on a range of things. We've always had spirited interviews on the air. I'm interviewing him in a couple of weeks about his new book. I think he couldn't care less what Donald Trump does. He has decided, listen, Trump out Christied me last time because Trump was better at it than Christie. Trump had the name recognition. Trump had the everything else going, and the Republican Party was ready to embrace him, and that's what happened, okay? Christie is saying, if I'm going to lose, I'm going head-to-head with this guy. I'm not backing down. I think he actually thought last time that Trump would flame out and that Christie would be the likely choice of the Trump people. I don't think he gives a darn, Frank. I think he's saying, if I'm going to lose, I'm going head-to-head with this guy, and Trump wants to destroy him. Christie is not going to play nice in the sand with Trump from whenever he decided. It's going to get worse. It's going to get icy between the two of them. And if you think Donald Trump can say nasty things about people, trust me, I've been on the other end of Chris Christie saying things to me and to other people. He can fight as dirty as he needs to in a race against Trump. And I wouldn't bet against Christie in spite of where Trump is right now. Yeah, this is Trump's party, no doubt about it. It's early, Frank. It's early.
That it is. And it's certainly, as Yogi would say, it is getting late early, but it's still early. Steve, it is always a treat, my friend. I look forward to having you in studio sometime soon. Take care, Steve.
All the best, Frank. Take care.
The
buddy.
great
Bye-bye.
Steve Adubato.